I would like to show you an example that is from the news where a 7-year-old girl lost 3 of her limbs in a missile strike. It's a 2-minute news clip that also contains a bit of context when and where that happened. And my goal and the purpose of this talk is to show you how um, on the one hand, when you are confronted with such immense um, pain that is so heartbreaking to see for, I think, anyone, that you do not freeze up in helplessness. This is the purpose of that talk. Because very often our reaction is, oh my God, look at this, this is so horrible, what can you do? And when learning deep emotional work, you are on your path to prepare yourself for basically anything. So this is definitely a stark example, but this is what we're doing it for. If not for this, then for what? So that is one aspect, to basically end the helplessness and get you in the mode of, okay, yes, this is massive, but now what do we do, right? So I think this next step is something that is all too often missing in our narratives about pain, be it physical, be it emotional. There is the analysis of the problem, and there is the horror and the horror, about to say, the horror, the shock, and people freeze up and like, oh my God. And when it comes to injuries and physical pain, we usually think, all right, okay, there will be doctors and surgeons, and there will be a way to fix that as good as possible, right? We do know that that's possible when it comes to physical injuries. But when it comes to the emotional consequences, the layman, the general audience, does not have that automatic reaction. What they do is just be like, oh my God, that's gonna be terrible, and how will that person ever get over this, and this and this and this. And um, I want to make the contribution for the general audience and show them that there are ways, and for the learners, and giving them some specific advice. So this video is basically for two audiences: for a general audience, and it's for the learners of deep emotional work. So it serves both purposes. The next aspect, and that is more for the learners, for the students, is to understand that with very little information in the beginning, you can already come up with a concept of what is likely going to be at least your first approach and your first steps. Then, as you already know from the training when you're enrolled, that even though every fate, every story is of course personal and individual, the path to overcoming certain challenges and hardships, there are patterns that repeat themselves. So we can already extrapolate a likely path for this girl in the video example that we're going to watch together. That does not mean that all the things I say would definitely happen in the way I'm describing them. And also, you always have to react to things that come up in any process, of course. But again, I want to show how with very little information in the beginning, there's already a path. And that's so important to understand, that because people who are in pain or go through something very difficult, the less time you need to figure out how to approach an issue, the better it is. The more time you can spend on actually working through it, and you do not have to re-traumatize the person by digging too much and having in this case, this girl to repeat her story over and over again, which is something you would want to avoid. And finally, before we're getting to it, in this day and age where everybody is commenting on everything and there's usually very little consideration on the why you are doing things, I have reflected about what would be appropriate to talk about the video. And this girl and her family, I mean, they are exposing themselves in the media, so they're making themselves vulnerable by sharing their story to make it known. So the comments I am making come from a place of care and are educational, and I think can help, if not the therapists of this girl, which might happen, but other, people who care for people in need and going through pain, in making good decisions. So that is the basis for me to allow myself to make a comment on that. The video reminded me of an experience I had myself after the 2018 attack with a van that drove down one of the very populated roads in Barcelona. And at the time, I was coincidentally in Barcelona, and then the next day I went to the hospital and I worked with some people affected by this. So it reminded me of this. So I do kind of speak of experience here. But again, once you understand that the path to solving emotional issues is usually very similar. It doesn't really matter much the context. I have not edited the video. It's the news clip as is. I do think fair use applies here for educational purposes. So you do have context, but the location and the wider context of the issue is for the specific discussion of what I am teaching and sharing, not relevant, but of course it is also part of the whole story of this girl's context and story, obviously. Now, before watching any media that do contain pain, suffering, and the direct or indirect depictions of violence, and here we have the physical and mental consequences of violence, man-made disaster in the life of a 7-year-old girl, and of course the family and other people affected by that event. It is not common to prepare oneself for it, but when you're a student of the matter, then you should. I mean, anyone should. But it's like, how should I say this? We're living in a world where exposing yourself to this kind of information, pictures, etc., is it's just something that is accepted as normal, in the sense of, okay, you do that. And sometimes news channels, they put like a writing, okay, does contain images that might be disturbing to some viewers or whatever, or contains images of dead bodies, or contains images of, you kind of get an indication of, okay, there's something intense coming, so you can make a decision if you want to expose yourself to it or not. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is that it's so normalized to watch these kind of images that without maybe talking about that too much now, but it is so normalized that we overlook the effects that it has. And it is not only this obvious thing that, okay, yeah, no, it might affect me. I might, later think of it, or I might, get a nightmare from certain images. That's certainly something that can happen. It can have this indirect traumatizing effect on you to a smaller or a larger degree. That is totally possible, especially if it is something that really, hits a nerve, so to speak, so that really triggers you because it might connect to something that you have experienced in a similar way. So you would already know to avoid triggering, as we say, triggering material. That can be movies, that can be basically anything. So that is one aspect that one should know about. But the other aspect, which I think is much more hidden and overlooked and not very much seen and talked about, is that whenever we see the consequences of violence, disasters, and we're confronted with the resulting pain, what results is inevitably a sense of helplessness. And that's never a good thing, because helplessness is a dead end. That's not a good place, and that does have over time it has a subversive effect on the individual, and the individuals make society. So it does affect society when confronted with helplessness over time, because helplessness is always, okay, what can we do? And we can do nothing, so that's the helplessness. So helplessness and pain at the same time, and that's basically the prototype of trauma. And then that will always lead to a variety of coping mechanisms, one of which is to say, okay, I can't look at that even anymore, and de-empathizing. So, okay, no, I can't have that anymore, and these people have to, themselves, get over it or whatever. So the cynic is born in a situation of helplessness and pain, you see. And if you have enough cynics in a society, it's a very dangerous situation for humanness to persist. Yeah, it's a very, very dangerous situation, and that's a slippery slope. Not everybody, but a number of people. So I do not recommend to expose yourself to this kind of material when you regularly feel, okay, well, I'm ending up in a place of helplessness. That is really something you should avoid. Just don't do it. Focus on what you can do constructively in society and play your part and do your thing. Not everybody has to work in that area. And the professionals who want to work with individuals who are vulnerable or overcoming these kind of challenges and difficult, very difficult life situations, you also should limit your exposure to it to situations where you're either studying, where you're learning, which is right now, or when you're doing something about it, when you are changing it, because that will limit the sense of helplessness, because you're either learning about it or you can do something and experience the change that happens. But there is no use in looking at pain and just then sitting there and you having to process it after. There is no use in that. We know there is. Well, if you are very naive and haven't seen what's going on in the world, you might want to expose yourself to something to realize, okay, well, this is the world we're living in. I give you that. But once you have realized that and you understand that this pain is happening millionfold, then there is no purpose in you looking at all the pain of all the people and just looking at it and being just, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, all day long. There is no purpose in that. And there is the danger that you rather would turn into someone who has to shut it down, and you can't even look at it anymore. So you lose your empathy. You don't do that. This is a bit what happens in medicine or in medical training in medical school, that very young people who are not at all mature to actually face the pain and desperation that their patients go through, and then they are confronted with all this, and then they shut it down. They're like, no, I only want to focus on the medical side here, medical, what they think is medical, which is only, you know, okay, what do we do? What is the prescriptions? And they make it all academic and about knowledge, and that's a way of, you know, getting distance to this overwhelming experience of helplessness of oh my God, how are these people actually dealing with that? You see, so that's a coping mechanism, and that happens to a lot of people in medical school. And then we're surprised when we have a large share of doctors who are cynical, you know, and have other problems of not being able to deal with the full dimension of what it means to be a physician, which does have an emotional dimension always. It changes you, it does something with you. But when you're not being accompanied through that process, and you do not have concrete, precise tools and exercises that you can apply in order to let you grow with it, you're lost. But the medical education system does not take care of that at all. It's not happening. So you basically roll the dice. If you come out of that as a cynic, or you still keep some of your ability to, you know, to feel and empathize and deal with all that. And that's medical education. And then after that, what happens is the reality of medical practice, which is an economy-driven, a profit-driven institution in almost all countries and situations, where there is no time for that. You either deal with it or you don't. And in most contexts, you're being let down by the system, and you're not even aware that you're being let down. It's just normal, and then you have to deal with the burnout and the consequences of all that. And it is you. Well, that's what the system tells you. The system tells you you are too weak. It's your problem, and now you have to solve this, etc. Right? So there is that cynicism and cynical treatment towards you already built in. And in this context, now with knowing all this, we are watching that video together, and I will then, you know, actually start teaching you something to end the helplessness. And I do hope that if you're in such a situation as a provider of care, that you can take something from it.
خلاص ما تزعجوهاش تمام تشرب يا رنا.
أول إشي كان نفسي أكون إيش ممرضة رسامة، بعدين صرت ممرضة، بعدين صار نفسي أصير معلمة، بعدين صار نفسي أصير صحفية، بعدين صار طبية. وما توقعتش إني أصوت، توقعت إني أستشهد، لأني ما أجى فيها صاروخ ما حسيتش ولا بإشي. كهرب أجت فيه هيك يعني، وطلعت آخر نظرة بإبن جريانا، أجى الصاروخ علي، طلعت فيه هيك وقعت خلص هيك يعني. أنا بحب الرسم، إيد سبقتني للجنة اليمين وزرعت نيتين. إيد اليمين كل إشي بعمل فيه، بكتب، برسم، بشرب، باكل. الحين إن شاء الله بتعلم أكتب فيها، علشان لما أخش المدرسة أكتب إيدي الشم.
سمعنا صوت ضربة، طلعنا نجري يعني أنا وأختها وأخوها الكبير. لقينا أخوها اللي صغير محمد ضربة أجا ارتمى على باب الدار، صرنا نسمي ونكبر، وأخوها أخذه، دورنا عرف ما لقيناهاش. بيجي قاعدة ما يقرب ساعتين لما ندرينا إنها في المستشفى يعني مقطعات أطرافها.
رسالة للعالم إنه نعيش زي الأطفال البلاد برا بسلام وحرية، ونصير نلعب كورة وتخباي من دون حرب ولا تدمير ولا قصف دور.
تربية عشان مش مية أحسن لها.
Now, the first thing that you want to do as a provider of care is to extract always as much information as possible from as little time as possible. So here, from this short clip where this girl talks maybe half of the time, around about approximately maybe a minute, we can extract already a lot of information. So we know she's an 11-year-old girl. She was obviously school age. We know that she was actually right-handed, and she has her left arm. She lost both legs and the right hand or arm. She was brought to Turkey, so there was that. She is not in her home right now. She's with part of her family. And then she talks about all the professions she wanted to become. And that is, probably like one of those potentially heartbreaking moments for anyone to listen to see the dreams and plans of this girl shattered by that event and the resulting injury and disability. So that is one aspect. That's one thing you might experience there. But then I'm inviting you to focus on what you have. This is something that you need to train yourself on, to focus on what is and what is still left rather than on what is lost. That will be a part of the process accompanying her when it's about mourning. The mourning here is about maybe friends that she might have lost in that incident who maybe died. I don't know about that. But definitely it will be about her mourning the limbs that she doesn't have anymore, and mourning the life that she now will not have. But you would work on that with the techniques appropriate for mourning that we do have in deep emotional work, obviously, only when that comes up, right? Once that mourning process starts, and that might be delayed in life, that might be when she turns 18 or 25 or later in life, and it might come in waves, and it might come several times in her life that she will go through phases of mourning. And when that comes, you would then deal with this in the way it's appropriate. Right now, she has already, and that can only humble us. Well, it humbles me to see what creative coping mechanisms she already has in place so short after the event. It always humbles me how the receivers of care, those who we are supposed to help, have these ideas that work for them, that help them to move on in life. There's something built in, and in this case, concretely, what do I mean? Two things. The first thing she said is when she says, "Oh, I hope I can now learn how to write with my left hand." I'm like, oh my God, that is exactly what you would hope her to say from the provider's point of view. You would hope that she can say, all right, okay, but I can start learning to write with my left hand. So she's already there, it comes out of her. So this is definitely something you would want to reinforce. That has to happen, of course, not only through emotional work, that has to happen in real life. Any kind of emotional process has to happen in a real life where she will be helped to develop her skills, to improve the skills of her left hand. So that's one thing. And the other thing she says is about when she says, "Oh, my limbs are already her both legs and her right arm are already waiting in heaven for her, or they already made their way up to heaven." That is her way of dealing with this fact for now, and is making that loss right now as bearable as possible. So that's something you would want to reinforce too in the techniques. So those are already very strong pieces of the work that you can then put into the specific methods. Another strong resource for her are all these plans of what she wanted to become in life. And this is a two-edged sword, of course, like it has two sides. On the one hand, it's amazing that she emphasizes things that she wants to do. And like in her case, the painting, she says she loves to paint. This is something that she can continue doing if it is with the left arm, left hand, but that is something she still can do. So you would want to let her trying to paint as much as you can, draw, paint, and whatever she wants to do to get through this. And then it has this other side of that certain parts of her wishes for the future will not materialize in this way she dreamt of it. That will not happen. She will not be a doctor in the same way she would have been with all her limbs. There might still be ways to accomplish a lot of this, but that will depend on external factors, on resources, on the situation, and it might, to be realistic, most people's situation is far less than ideal in life. So there might be things to mourn about at some point in her life when she might say, okay, it didn't turn out the way I imagined. But later, a successful integration after, and I know I'm jumping a bit now, decades ahead or years ahead at least, so this is not something you would have to deal with right now. But when it comes to the integration phase, it's always this, my life is different now because of this event. I have mourned the life that I did not have because of the event. But it is still, I made the most of that life. And that's the goal of assisting her as good as possible to make the most of the life that she has, to make the most of what is left. And it will be different, but it can be in its own way fulfilled, and dignified. And that must be the goal, to make the most of it. Now, coming back to maybe a little bit in an earlier step in the process, which we haven't yet talked about, which is the more immediate a consequence of such a traumatic event, is watching for how she, or if she manifests signs of trauma, like nightmares, or maybe seeing certain images again and again, having these intrusive memories, etc. So you would watch out for that, and then deal with it accordingly. And before that even happens, you would preventively use stabilizing techniques with her. So just letting her draw and paint, and talking with her about what she's painting, maybe butterflies or something nice, or whatever she is painting, you would want to reinforce the good things in there. And if she's painting negative images, I don't know, ruins of broken houses, or uses a lot of dark colors and black stuff or blood or whatever, you would also allow that to take place, and basically let her talk about it. And when she gets into an emotion, you would soothe, accompany her, and then when that gets too much, you would use bilateral processing, that technique. And this is now something for the learners and for the students. If you're just the general audience, you will not really know what this is about. But we do have some video examples on the website, so you can at least see, what is this about. So that will help her process the negative emotions and then restabilize her. It is adequate and all right to let the bad stuff come up, as long as it doesn't overwhelm her, as long as it is not, permanent and repeating and having a permanent impact on her quality of life. Then going through negative emotions is part of the human experience, and she will have to go through some, but it always has to be accompanied. Yeah, that is the very important difference here, to find the right amount and accompany it with the right technique. Yeah, that is the key. Then there's the dimension of the family. The family will, in a perfect world, they would have access to care themselves, so that they can process these emotions they're going through, because that will impact a lot on how the girl will, go through all this, is how the parents and the family circle is dealing with it. That will make a huge difference. So the family has to deal with the pain of the loss and seeing what happened to their child. And on the other hand, they are supposed to provide her with as much as they can, so that she can make the most of her life. And that will be, in the context where they're living, definitely be a constant struggle and a challenge. So that is a very difficult path. From the emotional work side and perspective, it would be important to accompany the mourning process of the parents. The mourning of, again, here's the mourning of the limbs. There's this, the daughter lost her limbs. But by processing that and accompanying that mourning process, you liberate resources, emotional resources in the parents, to also be able to look at the things that the girl still can do and still has. There is a scene in the last scene in this clip, where I think the mother, it gives her something to drink with this little bag of a juice or whatever it is, and she puts that to her mouth, and the girl is a bit like, I mean, we have to imagine, this is a scene where or a situation where there's the news are there. It is an emotionally very intense moment for everybody, and then there is that excitement about that news team. The journalists are there and recording all this, and so people are not, the way they usually would be, especially adults. We do change in situations, so we shouldn't start to interpret people's reactions from such clips. Absolutely not. But I'm just using it as a small example to illustrate something, which is the carers also have to learn how to care, because it makes a huge difference. And we can over care, we can like in this example, the girl has her left hand. She could basically take that juice box and drink from it herself, and she tries to grab it, but it's being done by, I think, the mother. So this is a small, nutshell example for how every carer, whoever existed, had to learn how to do this. And this is also something where I think their learning process has started, and that's something that will make a great difference. So if you're a provider of care for the emotional work, you would, of course, focus on providing the techniques as needed. When there are emotions, you would react to them the way you have learned it. Emotions will cue you to perform your art and deliver that that help and that service. And you should be aware of all the other aspects, even though you might not have an active role in them. But this is how I look at this video example. This is what I take from it. There is a path, there is an order of steps, and there is a sequence also of urgency. So in the beginning, you would use stabilizing techniques. You would find emotional resources, an inner safe place. An event where basically a missile or a bomb fell on your head, like literally, and blows you up. That is the culmination of the experience of a lack of external safety, which is, in the context of where the girl lives, a constant experience in her life. So external safety is missing and lacking. So this is something you would want to install through appropriate techniques, like the emotional resource for safety would be an important one. That might be the hugs of the parents. That might not be a place. It might be an imagined place somewhere outside of the context where they're living. But whatever the girl would give you, that you would then use. So an emotional resource or the inner safe place would be something important to install and practice and use. And then the drawing, then the painting, and observing what she paints and using these elements as sources of information for what other resources could be, what are animals she likes, what are things she likes, and trying to immerse her as much as possible in things she likes doing and things she likes to have around her. This is working even better with children. Children are very susceptible once you put them, if you just talk to them about stuff they love, they get very easily and quickly into the emotion associated with that. So you can put a pause to the pain by immersing her, in that case, in these positive emotions. And this is really your job, to give her an antidote, to give her something that can balance out the pain, so that she's not living in that constant awareness of this. And she shows all the signs of producing that spontaneously out of herself already. which might not be the case. You might encounter survivors who are not talking much, who are really completely still in, maybe shock is not the right word, because shock is something that has the dimension of time. So here in this case of the girl, the hours or days have passed. I mean, she had undergone surgery. The wounds are taken care of. So it's not the immediate shock after the event. So life has kicked back in, but you might encounter your receiver of care also in a different state where it's a bit more tedious, or you have to purposefully, maybe that's the right word, yes, you have to purposefully get to what are the resources here. It reminds me of the Barcelona example I mentioned in the beginning, where there was, in that case, it was broken legs, which, well, we do not compare fates, but well, a broken leg is less severe than a lost limb. I mean, I think we can say this. And there, the time frame was such that it was the day after the event, so it was very direct. So the shock and the helplessness and the oh my god sense was still much more present. There was nothing digested yet, so it was all very fresh. So there I asked, okay, well, what do you like doing? And then it was some kind of sport, and then I used an imaging technique to, okay, all right, go in the situation of performing this, and so on and so forth, and that could stabilize very well, including the family, and I could produce a very nice result in less than half an hour, and that could prevent, hopefully, certain post-traumatic manifestations, or decrease their likelihood of occurring if these things are being practiced then regularly. In that situation, it was easy in the sense of I could basically use anything as a resource, because the leg was broken, but it was taken care of, and it was not likely that that girl I was working with there would have had any permanent damage from it. Yes, there are scars, and yes, it's not exactly the same, but so I could still use some sport. In the case of this 11-year-old girl that we have been talking about, sport would not be the first thing I would use now. I mean, she might of course, get back into certain activities, and she's most likely going to be in a wheelchair / having prosthesis, etc. And of course, a certain degree of activity will be possible, but it would not be my first choice to let her imagine running around. That wouldn't be the thing. So you would start with the drawing, the painting, things she can do right now, and then expand, and then see, okay, what are the possibilities? Oh, and let her experience over the next years of being like, oh my God, look at the things I can all do, because that is what is left. That is what matters, to make the most of that. So the sequence is stabilization first, then observing if any post-traumatic signs are coming up, dealing with them through the time, processing negative emotions, including mourning and grief, and hoping that like the physical support, like the resources are there to enable her to make the most of it when it comes to possibilities and opportunities. And I mean, this is something we wish for every human being, for every child, including her. So that's the constant challenge in our world, that we seem as humanity to struggle and in many cases fail to provide that to children. And that should humble us and motivate us, the adults, to do better.